Welcome once again to Biblical History. This is Art McCarroll, your host. We've covered a bundle and we've got more. You know what? It's unending and never ends because God never ends. People have asked me, I've written about 120 books, and people have asked me, when are you going to quit writing books? I say, when God quits creating. It never ends. There's just no ending to it. But we're going to start today at the beginning. The beginning covers, we're going to find out, three major covenants. A covenant is a contract. A contract can be made by what you publicly promise to do or agree to do with someone. In Matthew 5, Jesus gave us the definition of when we make a promise or a covenant. I don't have the time to go there, but you could check it yourself in Matthew 5. Read it. When you go to a court of law, and a lot of people misunderstand this statement, they think it means you can't swear that you're telling the truth. Because Jesus said very plainly, he said, don't swear. He says, after the temple gold or this or that or whatever, because you can't even change one hair of your head. In other words, you better not offer to give something as proof that you can't pay for. That's what he means when he says you swear. And in court today, if what you swear isn't the truth, you're in what? You're in contempt of the court, aren't you? So he said, here's what he gave as an answer. Very plain. This is simple. This isn't about what you say, I swear on the Bible, okay? You can say, I swear on the Bible, because you're saying, I swear on God's word, that just as God's word is true, I'm going to tell you the truth. Well, you better worry about whether what you're saying is what's in the Bible or the truth. So he said, here's how he simplified it. He says, look, you swear that your yes is yes and your no is no. What he's saying is you must be super transparent. You can't make up stories. You can't gossip. You know, gossip is hearsay. They won't accept that in court, will they? They don't buy it. If you say, well, my friend said that he intended to kill me, so I killed him. That's funny. But anyway, no, I shouldn't laugh at my own words, but my wife tells me, she says, Art, stop laughing at what you say. But forgive me. I'm just human. It just strikes me as funny. Let's put it that way. No, make sure when you go to court that you say, yes is what I mean. No is when I don't agree. Anything more, he says, is sin. It's a lie. It's a lie. And you're in contempt and you go to jail. That clear, that simple. So these three major covenants or promises or contracts that God makes are yea and yea. They're for certain. They're absolute. They're guaranteed. But woe be to the one who gets stuck in one. If there's three, you got to live three. You don't live two. You don't live one. You're going to go from one to the next, right? That's what you're going to do. And any three witnesses in court is considered what? You're guilty. If three people come before and they were there and they saw that this guy was trying to kill you, you killed him before he killed you, you're guilty. If three said it. So these three covenants are very vital. very important and significant. So let's take a look at this first covenant. Where did it begin? In the beginning. In the beginning. It states very plainly and clearly. The book in the Bible is called Genesis. It's a Greek word. It just means genes or a beginning. So we see in verse 1 it states, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. The word beginning there is the first covenant. It means Bereshith. Bereshith in the Hebrew means the everlasting or eternal covenant, and that's the first one. It means what God started with, the Alpha to the Omega. The Alpha was where he was going. He made the Garden of Eden, put Adam and Eve in it. They had the tree of life there. They could have lived there in paradise forever. That's the everlasting covenant. So that's what we're talking about as the first covenant. So what we need to do is understand this everlasting covenant. I have time, don't I? Okay, sorry. I once in a while think I'm not on time. But the everlasting covenant is unique because the everlasting covenant means just what it says. Of the three major covenants, it's the only one that never ends. Because if it's an everlasting covenant or contract, it's an eternal contract. It's one that never stops. It doesn't even stop at the conclusion of Revelation 21, the last chapter in the Bible. It continues after that. Yes, people, there's more to the Bible than the last chapter of the book of Revelation. I'm asked this over and over and over again. Does the Bible conclude with the book of Revelation? No. It's just a new beginning. Of what? Of the what was at the beginning. Round and round she goes. Where she stops, nobody knows. That's the earth, see? That's the old song. So what we're finding out, this everlasting covenant is the only one that is significant for salvation in reference to paradise. Because the everlasting covenant is the Alpha. It's how God began everything. I've asked in previous programs, I've been asked, why didn't God make us perfect in the beginning? He did. He did make us perfect. How did he make us perfect? Because he slam dunked and put the tree of life right in the garden. All we had to do was eat it. If you would have been eating it, you'd have no death. You'd be eternal, forever. How's that sound? You like it? I like it. And not only is it forever and ever, it's total prosperity and riches and wealth eternally. We have nothing but pleasure and rest and good times. So may you take a break now with me, and then we'll return shortly. Welcome back, everybody. This is Art McCarroll. I had some interesting thoughts during the break. And we're ready to go on and move on to the second covenant. We found out the first covenant never ends. It's an everlasting covenant because it's eternity in paradise. Forever. Nothing but joy and pleasure. That's the everlasting covenant. And that one never ends. It's unending. It's infinitum. That's what it is. And although what happened, God had to come along and he got a little upset because humanity in the first thousands of years before Noah's flood got to the place that even though he offered the everlasting covenant to anyone who asked and sought it and repented, they refused to do that. They did just what continued to happen at the Tower of Babel in the land of Shinar. Everybody was guessing their own idea of how they wanted life to be. They didn't want the truth. In fact, it got so bad because they were arguing with each other and constantly in chaos, called Babylon. And Babylon is nothing but confusion or chaos. Pretty much what we got in the world today. All you have to do is take a look at it, and boy, there's trouble all over the place. And so he saw that what they were doing, they were coming to the place that they were just evil and wicked and violent all the time. They couldn't agree on anything. Just like in America in our Congress. Or as far as that goes, with the president. Or even with the Supreme Court. You can put them all in the same pot. It's a pity. But that's reality. We go to other governments, they're not too much different. Some are better, some are not. It just all depends. And some are always at the brink of war, and some are always having war, like the Middle East. That's almost been perpetual. So there you got it, and there it goes. Well, it got so bad, he said, you know, it's time for me to wash the kettle out. I call God chief chef and bottle washer. He's the one who cooks the meal. He sees if it's exactly good and tasty and nourishing, or he throws it all out and washes it out and starts over again. There's so many times in the Bible that God does just that. He doesn't wash it all the time. Sometimes he burns it out. He uses different ways of getting rid of trouble. Sometimes he just turns his back and leaves you alone, and you do what you want, and you end up in chaos. That's almost the worst of all the evils, for God to forget you or leave you alone. He never forgets you. He always remembers you. Later on, we're going to go into the book of remembrance. Did you know he keeps a book on us? Yeah, he wrote a whole book. Not only just one. I'm talking about a book of remembrance. It's a little different book than this one. So what happened? It got to the place he just flooded the world. That's what he did, and enough was enough. And then he made a promise after he flooded it. In verse 8 of Genesis 9, and God spoke unto Noah, who he saved and his family on the ark, and to his sons with him, saying, and I, behold, I establish my covenant with you, and with your seed after you. Now, I want you to understand what he was saying. The only people left in the world at this time was Noah, his 3 sons, their wives, and his wife. There wasn't anybody else. So what he was saying, the covenant I'm making with you, Noah, includes all people born from you and your family forever. This is an important covenant. He's making a promise to all of humanity as we know it in our day, because he's never flooded the world again. You know, I think of this global warming. I'm glad they changed the global weather change now, because weather always changes. So they're on safe ground. No matter what happens, they're right, see. Well, at least they're being truthful. Global warming, that's a joke. He said he'll never flood it again. God made you, but why would you believe that global warming's going to flood the world? God said, no, I'll never do it again. Who do you believe? Man or God? It's your choice. Oh, you know, I'm a simple man. O'Reilly always says this one. I listen to him as well as the other programs because I like to hear everybody just to see what their point of view is. But anyway, he always says, I'm just a simple man. Well, what he's really saying, I get to the basics. I don't want to get in all this complication, what he calls spin. Spin just means you're confusing me. That's all it means. And a lot of times what he says is so basic, I understand him. And I agree with him. And I think in many ways he'd agree with me. Am I progressive? Am I liberal? Am I a libertarian? Frankly, I'm all of them. I'm all of them. I'm for everybody. I don't exclude anyone. And you know, neither does God. And that's what he told Noah. This covenant God made is with everyone born of Noah and his 3 sons and their wives. Everybody. So the world today, this covenant is in force just as it was when it was first incepted into reality. And you know, this is known in the Bible as the Rainbow Covenant. Very interesting covenant because it's also tied in. Remember what I told you about the everlasting covenant in the first part in Genesis 1, the word beginning? The Rainbow Covenant still ties in with the everlasting covenant. Because if the everlasting covenant, the one given in the beginning, is forever, eternally, it means that. Let's read it and see if he doesn't say that. And then he said in verse 15, and now remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. So this is the whole world, including animal life, all flesh. And the water shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. It's not going to happen. The greenhouse effect is not going to take effect. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it that I may remember what? The everlasting covenant. It isn't, that bow isn't there to remember he's not going to flood the world. It's to take you back to the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. God intends to save the world. The potential for salvation is for the whole world, regardless of your religion. That's it. So let's take a break now, and we'll get together. I know it's getting exciting. See you soon. Welcome once again to Biblical History. This is Art McCarroll, your host. Notice Paul told us the reason for this covenant and for this law, and he explained it very clearly to Timothy, who was this young evangelist, and because he was young, he needed a lot of training. And so Paul would give special attention because he loved this man, because he was so faithful as an evangelist. Well, it tells us very plainly in 1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 6. Then he tells us, now the end or the conclusion of the commandment, this is what he's talking about, is love. In other words, the 10 commandments he gave out of his love for a certain kind of group of people. Now, he's not talking about here to the righteous people. He's talking to the unrighteous people here. So this covenant, once again, just like the Rainbow Covenant, Noah was covering people who covered murder, correct? That's what we found out. In this covenant, it's for people who were criminals. And he said the end result for them to get to the place that they should be is love. That's what it should be. And of a pure heart, it means as we covered about swearing, you got to be for real. You got to mean what you say. And of a good conscience. In other words, you're at rest. You feel at peace because you know you're saying exactly what you mean. So your conscience is fine. Descartes, the philosopher, says, I think, therefore I am. What he said was, because I'm conscious, I know I'm here. So when in your awareness of yourself, that you understand very clearly, all right, why you're doing what you're doing. And so he goes on and he said, with a good conscience and a faith unfeigned. In other words, you're going to be loyal when that's completed, all right? Then he goes on, he says, for which some having swerved from what? From being honest, from having a good conscience, from having a pure heart. They didn't have it. They were liars. They were deceivers. They weren't being honest with God. They weren't transparent. So he says, declaring to be teachers, they even get out there and they start acting like they know what they're talking about. Oh, we have the truth. Oh, we understand the law. We know how to apply it. He said, desiring to be teachers of the law. So it tells us what? Understanding neither what they say nor what they affirm or saying is true. In other words, you can know the truth, you could say the truth, and then interpret it and be all wet. And the word wet comes from ocean. You get drowned, flooded. Okay? Knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous man. If you're doing the right thing, you're trying to do the right thing. In what way? You have a good conscience. You don't feel guilty. You're pure in what you mean, what you say, right? And you're faithful. You're dedicated to that. Then he said, that's a righteous man. It doesn't mean he does everything right. It means what he's doing the best he knows. And he understands. That's a righteous man. Peter said the same thing in Acts 10:35. He says, God is not prejudiced, but everybody who fears him and seeks righteousness is accepted with God. He's our Father. What loving dad do you come to and he doesn't understand gobbledygook about what you're talking about and he whips you? That's bad. You're held responsible when you didn't even know what you were doing. So he's telling you here, but for the lawless who refuse to obey, and disobedient, for the ungodly, and for sinners, for the unholy and profane, for murderers of fathers and murderers of mothers, man, then he gives a whole list. And every sound doctrine you don't pay attention to. So that's why this next covenant is given. It was given to a bunch of criminals. They're called Israelites. They first thing they did when they got the Ten Commandments, they built an idol, and God said right in the Ten Commandments, don't do it. And they did it. So they weren't for real. So notice in Deuteronomy 5 and verse 1, where Moses called all Israel and said unto them, hear, O Israel. So this is just for this group of people. Hear, O Israel, the statutes and judgments which I speak to your ears this day, that you may learn them and keep and do them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. What covenant? Listen, verse 3. The Lord has made not this covenant. So he's telling you who's not included, right? Because they were criminals. With our fathers. He didn't make it with Abraham. Didn't make this kind of covenant with Noah, with Adam, with any, whether it be Enos or whether it be Enoch. He didn't make that covenant with any of them, or even any in the future. So whether it's future fathers or past fathers, because he tells us very plainly, but only even with us. Only with Israel. It was just made for them because they were criminals. They were rebellious. Who are all of us here unto this day. How clear do you want it? So the law of Moses wasn't made for anybody else but Israelites. And specifically for those Israelites in that day. That's why they missed going to the promised land. And they had to go through that whole generation. This generation he was talking to had to go through the wilderness for 40 days. So you see the difference between the old covenant and the new covenant? So now he divides it and tells us very plainly in 2 Corinthians 3 exactly what he's talking about. 2 Corinthians 3 and verse 2, the Apostle Paul, writing to the Corinthians, says, "You are our letter, or epistle, or book," that part, like Deuteronomy, "written in our hearts, know and read all men can read them." Why? "For as much as you're manifested, declared to be the epistle of Christ, ministered by us," get this now, "written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not in tables of stone like the Ten Commandments, but in the fleshly tables of your heart." That's it, people. So you see these three major covenants. Only the everlasting one counts. So now we want to go on to two covenants that are in the New Testament that are important to us. And God be with you all, and I look forward to having you with us again.